Welcome to Paradigm Shift, the podcast where we break down the latest in low code. I'm your host, Jon, and this week we're talking about the future of QA with the founders of Docket, a startup using AI to turn web testing frameworks on its head. No scripts, no brittle selectors, and no human testers, just natural language inputs and AI agents. Let's jump in. Boris, Nishant, welcome to the show, guys. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Let's kick this off with your origin story. So if you don't mind, what led you to creating Docket?
It's from our own experiences at companies we've worked at. So between us, we've worked at companies like Brex, Stripe, Citadel, Patreon. And the end-to-end testing processes at these companies was one, non-standardized, like everyone does it a little differently. Patreon, they do manual QA that they outsource to some company. Brex, we used to use the traditional test automation scripting style frameworks. And at Stripe and Shopify and Citadel, engineers would just do this manually by hand and maybe sometimes upload a little video recording. So just different across the board and very time consuming and difficult to maintain, especially when companies were using these automation tools, the Selenium, Playwright, Cypress style tooling, where you have to tie to a very specific selector on the DOM. It's just incredibly difficult to maintain because your website changes. Then not only do you have to update the code, but you also have to go and update the test to reflect that change. So we faced this problem firsthand at companies we worked at, and testing, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Boris, but testing was probably one of the lesser enjoyable parts of the job. So we figured we'd solve our own problem by building this company.
I think for the most part, devs testing their own code is often a chore, unless you're into testing like Scott and I are. But tell me, what is Docket exactly? What kind of features do you have? How do you solve that problem of a frustrating testing experience?
Yeah, so Docket, all our tests are written in plain English, and they're more objective-based as opposed to having users specify a specific click that they want to take on the page. So you might specify an objective such as log in using these credentials and ensure the login succeeds. And what our AI agent will do is look at the state of your web page each step of the way to generate actions which map to clicks, types, scrolls that the agent is going to take in order to progress towards achieving this objective. So for example, if your instruction is log in using these credentials, it might realize, okay, I'm on some login page. I see a username or email field. This is probably where I should be typing in that email. And it'll type in that email, similarly type in a password somewhere, and then click that login or sign in button. Whereas in a traditional tool, you would have to specify each of those clicks along the way. So improving on that maintainability burden.
Describe for me exactly where AI comes in. What parts?
Yeah, it's in, most importantly, generating those actions from the objective that you supplied, right? So the AI is figuring out by looking at your web page, we do it two ways. One, by looking at your DOM, and two, by taking a screenshot of your page, where it's currently at and what you asked it to do. So taking this login example again, it might say, okay, I'm on this login page. I see the username, the password fields, and I see the objective I was given, which is login using some credentials. We're going to feed those into an LLM and say, hey, here's the state of the web page. Here's what I want you to do. What's the next most appropriate action that you should be taking? And in this scenario, it might say, I think I should type into the email field. And then we'll get a new state of the web page, one with the email filled in, and then ask it the same question. And then it might say, hey, I think I should type into the password field. It'll type in there. And it'll keep doing that until the AI has enough information to provide an assessment on the objective, whether it be pass or fail. So that's the main part, and breaking those objectives on what you want to test down into exact actions that need to be taken on your web page.
And I've been playing around with Docket a little bit. Describe how it makes the decision, because you mentioned that it'll look at the DOM and it'll also do some OCR analyzing. When does it decide to use which?
So on Docket, in our steps, there's a little eyeball icon, and currently it's up to the user to essentially decide at what point in the test does it make sense to use vision. And a good example is some of our clients that we work with, they have generative AI solutions where they'll type in some text on their application and it'll generate an image. And they like the vision capability because for that visual assertion, they can click the eyeball and say something like, generate a picture of a red car, and then verify that you see a red car that shows up in this panel on the right. And then that image gets fed into the LLM, which then makes that assertion for them.
Very cool. Is it analyzing like what steps are adequate or appropriate for OCR versus just looking at the DOM?
Yeah, not today. So today, by default, we do rely on the DOM because it's cheaper and faster and a better user experience because it'll be more snappy. But what we're building out now is making that more dynamic, where we want to start by looking at the DOM because, again, it's fast. But if it's not able to figure out what needs to be done by looking at the DOM, we're automatically going to fall back to vision and say, okay, here's a screenshot of the page now. Now, do you see what the next most appropriate action would be?
Gotcha. And I think you mentioned, Nishant, there's many players in this field already. There's the usual suspects like Playwright and Selenium and Testim. And all of those testing frameworks have been trying to incorporate AI into their test suites. How does Docket differentiate itself?
I think it's the difference between having AI as an add-on versus AI at the core. Like a lot of these traditional solutions are saying, oh, we can use AI to auto heal your steps. They're still the traditional steps of exact actions to take, but they're saying, oh, AI will tell you, hey, this is incorrect. Now change it to this. And another one is they're saying, oh, you can use AI to write the exact actions that need to be taken. That's very different. And the maintainability burden on those, it's frankly still quite large because those do still break. Whereas Docket, again, the actions are generated dynamically. Like that is the de facto way to write a test on Docket, which is where the major differentiator comes in. The maintainability is just 10x easier on Docket.
Am I getting this right? And I think this is a really important point. Am I getting this right in that AI has been a way to augment a tester's workflow on these other platforms, i.e., make their test steps easier to write? Whereas with Docket, it's not only doing that, but it's also actually performing the tests for them, which nobody else, as far as I know, is doing. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. Like there is no other way to run a test on Docket other than for making a higher level objective and having the AI break that down into actions.
What is your ideal user right now? Who's using Docket and who are you targeting? Is it QA folks or developers, product folks, or all of the above?
So today it's been two main buckets. One is engineers who would write these tests using Playwright, Selenium, Cypress, their traditional frameworks. They like Docket for the aforementioned reasons, where the maintainability is just 10x easier. And two, it is the QA teams who would be performing these regression tests mostly manually. And they use Docket because team members, whether technical or non-technical, can write these tests extremely easily and be able to essentially 10x what they're able to achieve.
And I want to speak to our use case. Well, we've been playing around in using Docker, and I think why I love it is because we're a consulting firm. We're just a bunch of developers, so we have no in-house QA, and we like Docket because there's basically no learning curve, and there's really no investment. from time on our end to hire someone, to have dedicated QA. It enables us to add testing to our services without really that much lift. Are you finding that you have use cases like us where it's not just QA, but it's also just really just anybody that's looking to test? Or do you see that as a user base that you'd like to target too?
Certainly. So it's the case that you mentioned as well. There has been interest from product managers, which you touched on earlier as well, to dog food features that their developers are building to just write some tests and essentially assert that different flows that developers have made are working as expected. Because one other neat thing about Docket, again, is since the actions are not hard coded, you can make the objective more higher level. Like, where if you just say you have a form on the screen, you could just say something like, fill in this form, and the AI will come up with reasonable values to fill that form in with. And maybe every time the test runs, it's going to try a different permutation. So you're getting a lot more test coverage than you would if you were to hard code, hey, always use this first name, always use California as the state. If every time it runs, it picks a different state or a different phone number or a different element in the dropdown, then you're getting much more coverage as you run that multiple times.
Yeah, totally. And walk me through, what a typical workflow might look like, if you don't mind. Step by step. Say I just I shipped a new feature, and I pass that over to QA. How do you get started? Where would you start with Docket, and then where do you go?
Yeah, so you would open up Docket, and presumably you already have a few other tests that are written out, and you have a test suite, which is a collection of tests that you've already running in your pipeline. You would go to like your tests section, and right now we just actually shipped the duplication feature, so you could take an existing test, you can duplicate it, and it would open up a view where you have on the left these cards with English text that define the steps or the objectives of the test. And on the right, you kind of have your simulation preview. And so you think about your feature, and there's kind of two ways you can go about it today. You can manually write out the English and say, hey, oh, we just added this new maybe button that opens up a form. And you literally write, click this button or navigate to this page, click this button. And then in the next step, you would write, fill out this form, and you could specify the text, or you could just leave it kind of ambiguous, and then the agent would figure out some placeholder text. Or I think the feature that you like, John, is you can click that little the magical button and import like a PRD, or you can import an existing script, or you can essentially just import some instructions, and our agent would break it down into those English objectives that you can then kind of tune up. And then you hit simulate, which would then in real time process those steps one by one. You get that live feed into a Docket agent working through your test case. And then you would click save. And then next time the test suite runs, it would pick up this new test.
You're right, Boris. That is my favorite feature. If you can take a user story and just paste it in there, and it'll come up with your test steps. It's really amazing. Boris, are you able to talk about like the tech behind the scenes, like what models you're using?
Yeah, we benchmark pretty much every model possible, and we landed on Anthropic's Claude Sonnet 3.5. We found that it has the best accuracy and just the best unit economics.
Is there any challenges that you've come across with either the models that you're using or just where AI is currently? Where do you see? Because I notice, I'll give one example. Is just like I notice, like it's not slow, but it takes a while. It's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just something that I would expect, and I just assume with the pace that things are going and the resources that will be able to help in the future just speed that up. That's only going to get better. Is there anything else that you think that it struggles with today but will be better tomorrow?
I think you mentioned on two key points. Speed, definitely. that processing, that round trip time from a prompt and those tool calls that Nishant mentioned, as well as processing images, and the other just being cost, like the amount of tokens it takes and cost per token for a single instruction. We see those two as probably being the first to come down and improve. In terms of accuracy, I think it's already pretty accurate.
I can touch on one more there. As the context window of these models gets larger and larger, we'll be able to have better memory functionality where these tests will, today we're still writing maybe a few steps on Docket, but 2, 3, 4 years from now, imagine when the context windows are massive or memory has become a solved problem for large language models, you could say maybe just a sentence. And since it has that memory on all the previous steps it's taken, it'll be able to run a very deep and thorough test trying different permutations and just output a result to you and be pretty much fully autonomous eventually.
Yeah, I want to talk to that on where you think where this is all going. And you guys mentioned this to me when we were first onboarded that it could be a possibility that you onboarded with some context of who we are, what our business is, so that when I say word A, it knows what I mean. How do you plan on expanding that?
Yeah, so today we do that as part of our onboarding process if the customer does have some specific vocabulary that might be unique to their product, where we'll, in the system product, we might inject. A good example is from Patreon. When we were demoing to them, we injected what the meaning of the word pledge is. On Patreon, pledge means to subscribe to a creator. So if you write pledge in Docket, it'll know, okay, I should figure out where this subscribe button is and try to click that. So that's what we do today, right? But again, as these large language models get better and better, you could put a whole lot of context in there, maybe even every PRD that you have at your company or every Jira ticket that you have at your company, just chuck that in there. And it's just building up this context on what your platform is and what your product can do, and which will eventually lead to more and more accurate tests.
I think that's a big benefit of just having someone in the real world today, an actual QA person, because they're familiar with the context of the business. They have all of those details. So it seems to me that once you conquer that bit, there's really then no difference and no argument against using something like Docket versus somebody in a seat doing the testing. Speaking of which, how do you feel about being a disruptor, and what do you feel about the conversation about AI tools displacing what is traditional roles in software development?
Yeah, we are seeing this in many of the agentic AI tools, and I think it's naturally over time, yes, some jobs will be replaced by AI, but more jobs will also be created. And those folks that are early adopters in this space are going to benefit from these efficiency gains a lot quicker. And we're seeing this mostly across the board. I would say still in fairly early stages. Docket is an example of how this might impact the QA role or the traditional QA role today. Maybe we won't have as many manual testers. Maybe we'll just have a few QA managers that are just looking over products like Docket and inputting tests into them or synthesizing outputs from these platforms. We're also seeing this in I don't know how familiar you are with the AI SDR products, where those sales folks that used to send emails are being replaced by essentially AI that they're pretty crazy now, where it does a ton of research on whoever you want to send the email to, synthesizes, where they went to school, what their role is, when they were promoted, and writes a very tailored email to those folks and sends it off. So this is happening across the board, where these traditional roles and what the expectation of these roles are is changing over time as AI enhances what we're able to do.
Now, the way I see Docket is that right now it's targeting some specific, mainly UI testing. Do you see it expanding into more areas of testing, integration testing, or anything else?
Yeah, I think an interesting point about Docket is when we think about how it interacts with an application, it's true, it does use the UI, but ultimately it is using the application in staging or production environment. And through the UI interactions, it does make calls to the backend, and it actually has effect on the state of the application for the logged in user or the QA user. So it's kind of in an interesting place where it only has access to the UI, but it can test your backend endpoints. You know, if you made a mistake when you submit a form that doesn't process the field correctly, that would show up on some next page or it would show up as an error. And so Docket's already able to test that. I think as far as next steps, there's definitely companies that are more workflow heavy that can already use Docket. And I think something we're thinking about as well is the applications are changing. We're seeing this pattern where applications are becoming a lot more prompt based. And when users type in prompts, the sort of the modern app, the 2025 application generates the UIs around the prompt and fetches the data based on what was typed into the prompt. And I think as we move into that new world, as Nishant and I are kind of in San Francisco, ear on the ground, Docket is going to migrate into understanding that new world and being the best fit QA platform for those prompt-based and generative AI interfaces.
Yeah,
it's really amazing to think what's next. Go ahead, Nishant.
I was just going to say, yeah, like things are changing so fast. Like if today we're talking about replacing manual QA, who knows where like 3-4 years from now, what web applications will even look like, and Docket will have to adapt accordingly.
Yeah, so my next question might be one that's pretty much impossible to answer, because I was going to ask you, what do you think the future of testing looks like in the next 3 to 5 years?
It's a button. Test my application.
Yeah,
there you go.
I do think that's the direction we're headed. Like, again, the biggest limitation to that being real today is model context windows and costs. Like the tech is, especially with these latest models that are coming out, definitely good enough for someone to code up something where, yeah, it's a button, it's memorizing all the context of your application, retrieving it as needed, and making smart decisions and covering different permutations of your application. But where you might run into trouble with that today is a good ROI. The unit economics of that might not make sense, where doing one such test might cost you like tens of dollars, at which point it might just be cheaper for you to have someone do it manually. But again, models getting better and cheaper is a very safe bet to make, especially where we're at today. So Boris, I agree with Boris there. In the future, it will be like a button, and it will have a bunch of different types of users, different personas that are trying to essentially break your application and surfacing bugs as they come up.
Yeah, totally. Scott, did you have any questions?
Yeah. So one of the questions that I have is around like how do you or how just from your experience, like are the tests that are run pretty deterministic? Do you usually, are you able to get like, hey, if I put the same prompt in, are we able to get the same results consistently after I've made changes and things like that?
Yeah, so that's something we thought about a lot, where especially in testing, right? If you run a test 100 times and your website hasn't changed, that test should pass 100 times or fail 100 times, depending on the state of the test. And what I'll say there is, since these tests are natural language, there is this idea of garbage in, garbage out, where if your prompt is extremely vague and what objective you're giving is super vague or extremely high level, there is more room for the AI agent to explore or take actions in your apps differently. And that's in your control. Some customers actually prefer that. Like the form filling example I gave earlier, like some customers prefer to fill out the form, just say, hey, fill this form out. And in that case, yes, it might pass 50 times because it was picking certain states, but then maybe it picked the state Alabama and there was a bug on when you pick that state. So that can be seen as a feature, but it's, again, as I said earlier, it's in your control. So if you wanted, you could say, hey, click this button, type this exact state in here, type this exact birth date in here, and make it extremely deterministic where it takes the exact set of actions.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It reminds me a little bit of like fuzzing or that style of testing where you're just sort of throwing things at your software to see where, hey, like this isn't a path that we ever thought about, but if it goes down this path, does it break? And I think that's a pretty interesting kind of possibility. It seems like, in my experience, when you're talking about end-to-end testing, coming up with good test data is always a big challenge, or it's kind of like that's has been a challenge that I found, is making sure that you have test data in there that you can select when you're using things like Cypress or Playwright. So yeah, I'm excited about it. I think the other thing that I'm really excited about is, when we think about where Jon and I are in low code, I work with a lot of really, really great developers who are able to solve problems, but maybe don't know JavaScript, right? Or, maybe they don't know Java for writing Selenium tests. And so that's always been a gap there is, when you use something like Cypress or Selenium, it's like you have to be able to write code. Where I love now that this possibility of now, like, as people that are actually true low code developers that don't know traditional programming language can now write tests for their low code applications that they've built.
I think that was an aha moment for us, actually. We were working a separate project before, and one thing I noticed, I was using Cursor for the first time, and it was very quickly printing out like a bunch of these components and component libraries, and I was stitching them together, and it was great. But what I noticed is one time I was looking at our staging environment for this project, and I noticed the progress bar had changed from like an actual progress bar to like some kind of like pie chart loading bar thing. And that completely went unnoticed by me because it generated so much code so quickly that I couldn't possibly review all of it. And it was my first time using Cursor, and there's just no way I could have caught it. And I think I was like, there needs to be a counterbalance to this code generation step and then this test generation or like this test processing step. And they need to be equally as easy to use. I can't spend like 5 minutes writing a whole application and then spend like 3 hours writing tests. It needs to be like 5 minutes writing tests, like, hey, make sure the progress bar is on the bottom left page. That's it. And then create a progress bar on the bottom left page. Like they need to cancel each other out.
Right.
And I think that's when we started thinking more about Docket as a business.
No, that's interesting. I've definitely found that to be a challenge with, quote unquote vibe coding, or just like having the AI, an AI large language model generate code for you. It's just like able to generate so much code so quickly that I think having test tools in place to be able to verify your code is going to be equally as important as generating the primary source code. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for where it's going. I hate writing test scripts. So like if there's any way that we can get away with that. And I think what I see with a lot of our clients though is they forgo that automated testing, right? And I think as your organization scales, or as the number of applications you have scale, or even the applications that you have grow in scale, that manual testing piece doesn't scale very well or very cost effectively. So I think like this, to me, the thing I'm excited about is hopefully we can bring automated testing to organizations that would otherwise forgo automated testing.
What's directly next for Docket, Nishant and Boris? What are you guys working on right now? What's in the near term?
Yeah, I can take this one. One feature we're really excited about is this sort of real-time tunnel into the worker as you're writing a test. I'm not sure how much you've played around with the simulation, but right now you kind of have to like one-shot the test. Something we're thinking about that would make the test writing experience 10 times better, even than the 10 times better it is already today, is being able to write instructions in like a little chat box, watch them play out in the agent, and then save them to the test. And so that way you can actually write tests much quicker, and you can write much more comprehensive tests because you can even write a complex set of instructions, watch them play out, undo those instructions again by saying like, oh, go back to the previous page, or like delete that thing you just added, and then kind of reset the agent and really try out different permutations of actions you want to try, and then create tests that way. Something we're really excited about.
Wow, that's really cool. Was there anything else you guys wanted to mention before we cap this off?
Chad, you want to talk about the vision for the graph?
It was a secret project?
Yeah. Go for it.
Go for it.
Yeah, no, something we're thinking about as we're kind of trying to close that gap and stay on the bleeding edge is modeling the state of the application through user sessions. So when users walk through the application, they take certain actions, and recording those actions through like a webhook or something, and slicing and dicing them into flows that users took. So like a login flow, a post creation flow, and then storing those, kind of like we talked about the context window. But right now, since the context window is small, we'd have to replace that with something like maybe some kind of vector database, and then storing for each of our clients, storing that data in this vector data storage. And then when users write something like test the login, we could actually take a look in that cookie jar and see what login actually means inferred through the user sessions. And that way we can start abstracting away some of this specific commands that you have to write in English and create a level of abstraction that is then powered by your state of your application. And our hope with that is that this would reduce the sort of the maintenance burden of like, if a flow does change, this would then kind of back propagate into this storage, and it would then hydrate this test that you wrote at a very high level. And so with that model, we think we can make test writing even easier than it already is.
That's really interesting. So I think if I understand kind of the gist there is you're basically recording actual users using the application, and then you're using that as your kind of pieces that you're going to chunk together to build your actual tests. So you have like you said, you have a resource bucket to go reach for. Oh, I need to see what a login flow looks like. I have examples of real users logging in to pull from. Really interesting.
Correct.
Yeah. Wow.
So this has been wonderful. Thanks again to Jon and Boris for joining us. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Jon, Scott, thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, guys. And if you're curious about AI-powered testing, go check them out at docketqa.com. If you like this episode, drop a review, share, or like wherever you found us. And if we don't see you next week, have a fantastic weekend. See ya.